In this video, we'll learn the infinitive forms of 6 new irregular verbs. By the end of this video, you should plan to be able to write down a list of all of your irregular verb names from memory, listed by group. Let's do an exercise that involves a strong, active imagination. You're going to have to imagine yourself walking out of Joel's house and down the street. We've been introduced to some of the verb shops nearest to Joel, including ser and ir, which are the two closest, haber, hacer, querer, and poder, which are a stone's throw down the road at the fork, and estar and tener, which are to the right of that fork. Before we start walking around in our imagination, let's talk about why these shops are where they are. As you've learned, all of these verbs are pretty complicated. Each one seems to follow its own rules. In particular, the past tense of each verb seems to have its own unique pattern. For example, in ir, Joel's preterite form is fui, for I went. This sounds completely different from his preterite tense for hacer, which is hice, for I did. And then that's different from the equivalent form of poder, which is pude, for I was able. Fui, hice, and pude don't seem to have a lot in common. But if you were to look at a map of the neighborhood, ir, hacer, and poder, the three that I just mentioned, are pretty far apart from each other. Suppose we look instead at two shops that are closer together. For example, hacer and querer are very near to each other. They just face each other across the street at the fork in the road. So let's compare some conjugations. Quise and hice, quiso and hizo, quisiste and hiciste, querían and hacían, and then queríamos and hacíamos. These past tense forms sound suspiciously similar, and that's because these two verbs are closely related. In the same way that hacer and querer are neighbors, we've grouped verbs together in Joel's neighborhood that have a lot to do with one another. So let's exercise our spatial imagination in order to memorize how these verbs are grouped together. As we do, we'll also be learning the names of a few new shops. Imagine that you're Joel and you want to take a flight around the neighborhood just to get some exercise and fresh air. To start out, you fly out of your house and take a look down the street. Immediately to your right is ser, and to your left is ir. As you fly along, you're going to have to make your first decision of the day. At the fork in the road, should you go right or left? As you approach the fork, you're facing haber to the right and hacer to the left. They're what you see if you look down the road. You feel more inclined right now to turn toward hacer. Looking down that left-hand street, you see an entire neighborhood of several verbs. You see hacer on the right, querer on the left, and a few other shops beyond that. First of all, on the left side, beyond querer, there's a gift shop called Dar. It's run by a woman who calls herself Darling, and she sells and gives away novelty items like musical cigarette boxes, the kinds of things you might buy as gifts for other people, but that you wouldn't be likely to buy for yourself. The word dar, kind of like darling, means to give. Now again, this is next door to querer, which means to want or to love. So as you can see, these stores are somewhat related to one another. As Joel, you probably don't feel very generous, so you turn away from the left side of the street and look at the right side. So we have querer and then dar on the left, which Joel isn't interested in. And then on the right side, in the distance, there's a building called Decir. Of course, when Joel says Decir, it sounds kind of like he's saying the seer. The woman who runs this store is a self-proclaimed prophetess, and everyone calls her the seer. Decir is a creepy place where the seer tries to tell people's fortunes. But instead of reading palms or a crystal ball, she tells them things based on what they say. When you enter Decir, you have to be careful what comes out of your mouth because she'll judge every single word. The word decir means to say. Next door to decir, between that and hacer, closer up, is venir. This is another creepy place, but in a different way. Venir is supposed to be a convenience store, but it's a little too convenient in certain ways. Anytime you walk by Venir, it tries to get as close to you as possible. It's sort of a mobile store mounted on wheels, and it tends to roll as close to you as it can. Sometimes it actually follows you down the street if you try to walk away. The man who runs this store is nicknamed Near because he always comes uncomfortably near to you, and venir means to come. To the right of decir and venir is another creepy place, hacer, where pigs are cooked and served. Today, you don't feel like giving anything away or being creeped out, so you turn around to see what the other road has to offer. Again, remember that we went down the road to the fork, and we turned left at the fork toward hacer's neighborhood, which is what we just looked at. Now we'll turn instead to the right, and here we have haber and several other shops. Of course, to the left, the first shop is haber, but you have no interest in going there because not only is this where the blind bear lives, today he seems to be practicing karate in the backyard for some reason. Further down the road on the left is Poner. This might be a good place for you to work out, but first let's consider the other options. Between these two stores is Saber. It's nestled in right next to haber, and like haber, Saber is run by a bear, but it's a different bear, the local mailman. Saber is the post office, but this bear who runs it is a very sad mailman because nobody sends him any mail. So he cries a lot, which gives him the nickname Sob Bear, or Saber. Joel associates mail with knowledge. Whenever Joel gets a letter, he feels smart because it's like he has new information to apply to his life. And he likes sending mail because he feels like he's sharing his knowledge with other people. The word saber means to know. Haber and Saber are actually closely related. The bears are brothers, and both of them go around Joel to all the different stores and houses. But of course, the haber bear likes to drink water from people's roofs, leaving them drier. Sob bear, meanwhile, does the opposite. He usually leaves everything wet because he cries all the time. In fact, his tears flow out of the store, and they're what cause the backyard of Poner next door to be constantly muddy. Note that there's something interesting about the street that haber, Saber, and Poner are attached to. The road has been worn down like a canyon thanks to the rushing water of Saber's tears. Instead of a road, it's more like a U-shaped trench. If you're walking, you might find it hard to climb up to the shops on either side. Haber, Saber, and Poner are on the left side of this canyon-like road, but let's look to the right. Here we have two businesses that have very closely related names. Poner, right in front of you, and Suponer, just beyond it. Poner is a board game store, and Suponer is a soup kitchen. These are both owned by Ner, the same eccentric old man who runs the toy shop. But Ner is usually too busy with his toys, so he leaves his very young son to run Poner and Suponer. Would you be interested in going into one of these shops? Let's consider whether they'd be any fun. At Poner, the most entertaining thing to do is place chess pieces on the chessboard. That may sound boring, but there's a special trick to it. If you do it right, the pieces magically get stuck and never move. Some people think that this is fun. They say, if you put a piece on the board right, it never moves. But generally the word never is shortened to ner. The piece ne'er moves. The word poner means to put. For example, I want to put something here would be quiero poner algo aquí. Next door is Suponer, the soup kitchen. Here, there's really nothing to do that's fun except to try to guess what's in the soup. For example, you might say, "Why does this taste like a wet dog? I guess maybe you put Chihuahua hair in here?" Remember the stressed syllables sup and ner, and you'll remember that the word suponer means to guess or to suppose. Let's review these 5 shops in this neighborhood and make sure you can see them in your imagination. From left to right, we have haber, saber, and poder, and then on the right side, suponer and poner. Really try to visualize where all of these are placed. The placement is going to be really important for learning the conjugations. Now, remember that there's this muddy trench of a street in between, as opposed to the previous neighborhood we looked at, which is currently behind us. That also is an important distinction, so it's important to keep all of these details in your mind as we walk around. Now we'll turn toward poder, which is the furthest one down this road, and consider going in, but no, let's continue down the street a little bit further. As the road curves to the right, something changes. The road here is still a U-shaped trench, but it's a bit more stylish with some ultraviolet lights along the sides. We're approaching the UV area. UV stands for ultraviolet, but it also indicates something about the verbs that we're visiting. They are estar on the left and tener on the right. These verbs have a strange UV in the preterite tense, such as tuve and estuvo. Now we'll turn around and fly back to the fork in the road. See if you can picture flying back and where all the shops would be if you went backwards. Go all the way back home, past ser and ir. You've just explored the essential verbs in Joel's neighborhood. Now here's the thing. Even though we just did that whole exercise, I recommend that you do it again in the same order, but this time entirely in your imagination. So see if you can pause the video and imagine visually where each verb shop is. Close your eyes, put on your wings, imagine yourself flying from Joel's front door down the street. Turn left and look at those shops. Turn right and look at those shops. See if you can remember every single shop from ser and ir to decir and all the way to tener and then back to Joel's house. Once you're able to do that, we're ready to explore some details of these verbs and learn how they're used. Let's actually start with some uses. We can use the infinitive of some of these verbs after poder or querer. For example, I can give would be puedo dar. So, and I can give you money would be y te puedo dar dinero. To say you want to know, that would be quieres saber. So, the question, do you really want to know, would be ¿Realmente quieres saber?
¿Realmente quieres saber?
Now, how about an interesting use of decir? Remember that infinitives have the power of putting an object pronoun at the end in a contraction. So, decir by itself means to say or to tell. But the contraction decirle means to tell him or to tell her. We can put a preposition before this, like in order to tell her or without telling her. Without telling her would be sin decirle. So here's a sentence example. He wouldn't go there, to her house, without telling her. No iría ahí, a su casa, sin decirle.